Hello and welcome to another lunchtime learning session from Robinson's Facility Services. We've had loads of you register for this session. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. I can see that my internet is struggling this morning, which is typical because we've tested it all and it's working really well. So you'll see to somewhere like over here, there'll be a chat function. So before we get going, can you just, somebody just say like, how are you finding the quality of this? Can you hear me okay? If you could just type in where you're watching from and is this working well for you? So if it isn't, it would be really helpful to understand that before we get going. So apologies. I'm just a little bit concerned if that's going to be a limiting factor for us. I'm your host, Kevin Ayres, and can you believe it? This is the fifth one of these we've run. Okay, that's good. Thank you so much, Amanda and Faye. Do let me know during the session. Oh, it's got a bit better now, so that's good. Yeah, do let me know if you're having problems during the session. You know, best laid plans of mice and men and all of that. I live in, in the countryside, so it's a little bit, yeah, it's kind of, yeah. Well, you get what you get. So this, as I say, this is the fifth webinar we've done. We've done one on pest control, lift maintenance, Legionella control, and fire regulation and compliance. So if any of those topics are relevant to your business, and like most of them will be for most decent size facilities, if you find this session helpful, do go and check those out as well. I'm talking to other experts, and again, a lot of those kind of questions that you might have, we will attempt to answer those in those previous sessions. So you can find those by going to Robinson's FS/video. Okay, super easy. Or there's a nice, like one of the first links on the top of the web page on the Robinson's FS web page is video, because we really value video, as you can tell. Now, in today's session, we're going to be looking at ventilation, ductwork, and air quality. And we've got another expert, Chris Buckingham, who's going to be helping us navigate through all of those vents today, understanding what are the issues, how can you stay safe and compliant in your facilities. And as I said, I'm really excited because this is one of the highest registrations we've had. We've had over 50 people. We've got loads of people watching online, which is fantastic. So why don't we welcome Chris to the stage, as my assistant calls it. Hey, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, so thanks for joining us. So where are you joining us from? I love the backdrop there.
So I would like to say, unfortunately, this is an office wallpaper. It's not my window view of my office, but I'm in a very sunny Leicestershire today.
Okay, Leicestershire, great. So thanks for that. And yeah, it would be a pretty tall office block to be looking down on that church behind, wouldn't it?
Maybe one day.
So Chris, as I said, you're obviously an expert in this whole area of ventilation. How long have you been working in that sphere, if you like?
I've sort of been working within ventilation and especially the cleanliness, the standards for nearly a decade now.
Wow. So you've probably literally seen it all, right?
I've seen some good and some not so good. Yes, definitely.
Well, you sent me some of those, so I know we're gonna be diving into. It's always I'm such a dad joke person. It's just been Father's Day. I'm nearly 50. I feel kind of I've paid my dues. I get to make some dad jokes. So again, just watch out for any of those ductwork related puns. Just before we get going, I just want to kind of map out where we're going in this session for everybody in this session, because we want to be respectful of your time. Everybody is watching. So first, we're going to go through what are the kind of key questions you need to be aware of. And I'm going to be asking Chris some of those questions. And then around 12:30, we get to a sort of more of a quick fire, some quick fire questions that we've got lined up. But we'd love to say, look, feel free to ask questions all the way through. If they're really relevant to what we're talking about right now, we'll try and tackle them at the time. But if it's slowing things out, I'll just say, look, we'll deal with those at the end. And if there's any really big questions, right at the end, we're going to try and finish bang on at 12:45. I'm not known for conciseness, so we will try, though, finish at 12:45. And then if you want to stay on past that, what we'll do is we'll leave the stream open, and Chris and I will be available for another 5 or 10 minutes if you have any burning questions that we haven't managed to cover, but everybody else can drop at that point. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So Chris, look, without further ado, look at that, we're bang on time. It's 12:05. So why don't we dive into this? I can't believe how on time we are. This is fantastic. So Chris, one of the big ones, right? So if I'm managing a facility, like, what are my legal responsibilities around ventilation? I'm guessing it's something that is one of those, like, even more than some of the other topics we've looked at, it's kind of one of those hidden things that stays hidden in a building, and like, oh yeah, like, well, what are those legal responsibilities?
Yeah, so the sort of the Workplace Health and Safety Act, which, if you like my office, you've got a copy of it somewhere sticking up on your door or in your area. Part of that is to ensure that your employer is providing ventilated workspace. And that's not just, it can just be cracking open a window, something like that. But if you're really enclosed and, we don't always have that sort of bad weather, for example, especially in this country, we need to ensure, your employer needs to ensure that you've got clean, purified air within your workspace for your working conditions.
Right. Sorry. No,
yes,
go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I said these are covered. You have approved documents out there covering that for ventilation, COSH as well. It all sort of builds up to the section of ventilation under the Act.
Right. So fundamentally, I guess, are we keeping people safe on probably what is the most fundamental thing? Can people breathe clearly and that they're safe to do so, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so and especially having looked at some of the sort of horror stories of what you've shown me, I guess you mentioned there about a window, which is such a kind of, it's obvious, like I can just open a window. But I guess, as you say, in more enclosed buildings, or maybe in the winter where nobody wants to open a window, that air gets to us through a series of, again, often hidden pipes, or ductwork, I think you typically call it. So, well, why is cleaning and looking after those so important, and what, I guess, are the risks if I don't do that?
So I think we'll get to some sort of photos and examples later on, but a buildup of dust within your ventilation is the perfect breeding ground for any microbiological contaminants. Stuff like that is obviously, it's never great. It's never great to have in your ductwork. If you're not clean and you haven't had your ventilation looked at, there's always a chance that dust will fall out the grills. Stuff like that will affect your air handling unit, your heater, your aircon unit, whatever that is. And anything that can interact with that or interact with the filter will put strain on the unit itself, which ultimately then doesn't provide you with the clean air that you need to, carry out your day-to-day.
So, and stop me if this is kind of obvious, but as somebody who's not an expert on this, I guess there's two sides to that equation, aren't there? There's the air that's already there that I need to get out and extract away. And I guess I'm thinking about things like kitchens, especially, or labs, or that sort of thing. But I mean, that could be true of any environment.
Yes.
The flow through. And then there's the fresh air in the first place. So I'm guessing things like, disease and microbe buildup is even more important in the inflow than the outflow, because that, it's gone, right? But
yeah, so the big thing
is that true, or what are the issues there between the in and the out?
It is. So the key bit is the air change. It's all about the air changes in the room. So that's obviously the ratio of what's coming in to what's going out. Obviously, we've all, it's been a good 3 or so years now since we've had COVID and got out of that. But that's been massively highlighted as a result, and unfortunately, if you're like myself, I do apologize for my eyes. I suffer quite heavily from hay fever, so I could be coughing and sneezing a lot, and no one wants to sort of put up with that in the office. So it is very efficient that is removed from your workspace, and clean air is then brought in as a replacement.
Right. Yeah. Great. So, it would be, well, tell you, look, why don't we just start with a couple of here, just to kind of emphasize the point on the kind of clean air here. So let me just I just love this these kind of examples. So what are we looking at here, Chris?
So the one on the left is actually it's from a hotel, restaurant, kitchen extract ductwork. system. So this is the system that when you're cooking under your fryers, deep fryers, and so on. It pulls the grease out, and then the grease is then cleaned within the filter and then to discharge. This particular example, and it's stuff that we will get onto with TR19, it hasn't been cleaned. I mean, you can see from the photo where it has been cleaned previous, but the build-up at the back is where it's just not been accessible. And the accessibility of your ventilation systems are so key for situations like this. This hotel specifically, it's in an A-listed building, so it's probably never been cleaned.
Right.
So yeah, and then the one on the right again is that's how it should look. Your kitchen should be accessible. You can see the sort of where it's come up through the canopy. Obviously, the photo's been taken from an access point, and that's the sort of standard you should be keeping your ventilation to. I mean, the one on the left there, I don't know exactly where that photo was taken in conjunction to where the food is being made, but it's generally very close. And the thought of having your food prepared in an area like that, it's not pleasant.
No, and so I think the interesting thing for me was the 3 meters, right? And so I guess if we're not familiar with, if I think about my kitchen, for example, I might clean the cooker hood, but I don't necessarily think about all of that, air that's oil laden or whatever, then goes through a long pipe to get out of the buildings. And so if my filter hasn't worked very well, and even then, it's no filter's like 100%, right? Or I haven't changed a filter recently. Then the idea that, of course, 3 meters away, how would I don't even know how I would get. Obviously, I'm just talking about my home here, but the problem might be quite a long way away from where I'm thinking, and that is still a problem, right? So I think that was the thing that really struck me, that it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And
so this is and that's why the inspection process of keeping up to date with the state of ventilation is so important. That the picture on the left there, that full system probably runs about close to 50-60 meters throughout that building. And that was 3 meters from the canopy. So it's not a very nice thought what the rest of it would look like once you get to it. So,
and I guess to your point of, the airflow through, I guess in theory, whilst it's extracting, at least the air's going the other way, right? But I guess as soon as you turn it off, then, those microbes that are growing there and so on are free to kind of wander back into the kitchen, as it were, back through the air. And also, I guess, is this a fire risk as well? All of that grease and build up there?
Yeah, massively. So this is specifically a kitchen extract system that will just run on an extract purpose. And like you said, it's before to the fire risk. As soon as that goes off, the smell of that grease and all that sort of burnt on carbon will come back through the kitchen area, and it won't be very pleasant. And if your ventilation has a loose joint or a loose access door, don't forget this runs through a hotel. There's every good chance you get a whiff of that, and that's not the sort of thing we want, is it? But yes, back to the fire risk, massively. I think we may have another photo, which I think you might bring up, of the main issue with this here is obviously the large.
Do you want another? I'll just whiz through to an extract.
So I do apologize. This is not the best time to be.
I was going to say, this should have come with a health warning. I hope you finished your lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
This is lunch and learn, but hopefully by now, if you watch these, you kind of what you're signing up for, right? So
the one on the left, obviously, there's clear pooling in there, and obviously that is a massive fire risk. Should any sort of high sort of volume of heat or flame connect that, there is a very good chance that itself would create a fire. And in this unit specifically, and in general, this ductwork's not fire rated. So should the fire, start within that ventilation, it will burn out and it will spread. And that's why it's so important, especially pooling grease like that. That's the worst kind you could get, really.
Well, and of course, as soon as it leaks out, it's going to be burning, oil that's coming out, right?
Yeah, exactly grease, right. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole list of problems should you get a fire within that, and there's just no need for it. There's no need for it. The build up on the left there is from months and months, and potentially years of not having it cleaned. And this picture on the right, that's how it should look.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. So you mentioned TR19. So what is TR19, and like how does it apply for, whether people are landlords watching this or property managers? Why do they need to pay attention to that?
So the B's of TR19, in fact, in my industry, it's like our Bible. It's everything we go to for the information. It's what we work to. It's the recognized industry practice for ventilation. More than recently, it's been split into two different sections. We have air, which we call it air, but that would be your clean air, your supply air, and your extracting air. And then there's a separate section for grease, which mainly is specifically for kitchen extract systems. So within that, there's plenty of guidance on inspection, how to inspect, methods of inspection, guidelines on when and how it should be done, and there's a rough idea of when they should be inspected, and what sort of timelines you really should be keeping up to date with your ventilation within your building.
Brilliant. Well, that's super helpful. And so, in your experience, are facilities managers aware of that, or how do they keep on top of that well, or is they
do sometimes? A lot of the times, I mention TR19 to them, and they sort of look at me with a bit of a blank expression. It's probably a lot of people seem to forget ventilation because I've worked on a lot of building sites, and on them building sites, it's the first thing to go up. All your other services go below, and you never really see it. It's not a lot of the time you can see it.
Like I can really imagine that.
Exactly right. So it does get forgotten a lot of the time. It's generally, it will be another service. It could be someone has to, or a grill, or some dust has fallen on somebody in a grill in a room, and then they'll look and go, well, that's actually ventilation. Follow it through and go, wow, we've not had this looked at for years. So unfortunately, it's not as sort of it's not as prioritized as I think it should be.
And I assume that you've got to be meeting those guidelines for your insurance. We talked about fire risk.
Yes. So the kitchen specifically, a lot of insurers won't insure you if your kitchen extract system is not cleaned at least yearly, but that can depend on the type of food you cook, the premises, and how busy you are. But again, those levels are risk assessed to an agreed, 6 monthly or quarterly, so a year. But yeah, a lot of insurers they won't touch you if you don't have evidence that you comply with the TR19 grease to keep it in.
I presume they've split that out because obviously it's such. I mean, as we saw from that photo, I guess it's such a common problem, and obviously there's so many restaurants and cooking facilities. It's such a important special case. I presume that's why they've split it out.
Yeah, so I think it's just a bit of simplicity for everybody that sort of works with it as well. It used to be a very large document that covered both. Having them in two separate ones makes it more manageable. And obviously both sections don't always apply.
Because if you haven't got any cooking facilities, you don't want to be going through not relevant.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's trying to make it easier to consume for the person that's reading it.
Who'd have thought some paperwork that's actually made simpler? That's brilliant. So we talked a little bit there, Chris, about we've even seen there about the grease buildup in that special case of kitchens. We've touched on this, but could you give us a little bit more? Well, why is it important to clean ductwork? And I'm thinking, you mentioned a little bit about biological contaminants and so on. What are some of the health risks, and why is that important? And again, I've got a couple of other pictures there if you want to refer to those.
Yeah, so again, like myself, I suffer quite heavily from hay fever. I also have asthma, and asthma is another big one as well because you need that dust removing from your workspace. Carpets, people in and out, traipsing in and out from outdoors, and everything like that. If your ventilation is not clean or it's not adequate, you're not removing that. And whether that's bringing in fresh air or taking out the bad air, if your system's under pressure because it's not been cleaned or your filters are dirty and it's not providing that suction, you're just keeping the dust within the room and you're not getting those air changes, and things like that. Yeah, asthma. It could be
that button in your car that when you go past the smelly thing that you press to circulate in the room, it's kind of like doing that all the time.
Exactly
circulating
right.
in the car.
Yeah,
and doing that all the time.
depend where where I am. We're a bit of the countryside here. When the farmers get out there and sort the fields out, it can be a bit whiffy. But if you're working in busy sort of built up areas or areas like London, especially, that air that you're bringing in, it's not the cleanest. So you really have to.
And all sorts, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So ensuring that you've got a sufficient ventilation to your area, it really is key. And so back to the.
Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. It's fine.
No, I've got a note here about sick building syndrome, and I've heard of that. But like in the context of this, what is sick building syndrome?
So sick building syndrome, it's if you create an environment that is sort of out there generating unsafe working conditions, there's every chance that building itself is providing you with the sickness. That's where you're getting it from. That's where your staff are getting it from,
really,
etc. You see high levels of absences, sometimes even worse issues, long-term leave, everything like that. So you need to ensure that the place, like all of us, we spend most of our time at work. In the office, you spend all your time there, and if you're in a place there that's not as healthy as it could be for you, having your workplace, the place that generates out your illnesses, is not ideal. It's not ideal for the people working, and it's not ideal for the employer either.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And yeah, once it starts to, nobody wants to work in a place like that, right? Do they? If just like it's just a bit grim or whatever. And
no, exactly.
No employer wants to have the kind of impact on absence and so on. Just thinking, you mentioned about insurers won't even insure catering facilities if they don't clean once a year. So, you're talking about TR19. What does that specify in terms of how often, never mind the insurance, but from a sort of legal or at least a guideline perspective, how often should commercial ventilation systems be cleaned? And does it matter what type of premises it is and so on?
Yeah, so commercial ventilation, are we putting the kitchens aside for this discussion? So we put them aside.
Sure.
Yeah, so
maybe with or without, so I'm not sure who's watching. By the way, just a little reminder, we haven't had any questions yet, so you're a little bit shyer audience than we had last time. We had loads of questions last time. This time we haven't any questions, so feel free to be thinking about your questions. Feel free to post them while we're talking. So Chris, sorry, go over to you. Maybe let's think of this with or without the kitchens.
So we look at them separately, and I say again, goes back to TR19 splitting into two different sections. Your kitchen area, your kitchen extract system. Yes, there's an idea to have it done at least annually, but it needs to be looked at to more of a site specific of how you use it. If you are constantly running and you're constantly using your fryer, and you cook generally fat foods in the premises, you would probably be looking at twice a year or sometimes even quarterly. The best thing to that, and TR19, this applies for both. It provides you with methods and sort of guidelines and acceptance levels to determine and carry out that risk assessment to give you the best idea of how and when, how frequently your system should be looked at.
Right. So risk, I was wondering whether it was going to come down at this. Ultimately, you've got to apply some common sense to a risk assessment. So I guess if you're an establishment offering all day breakfast, you're going to be cleaning a little bit more than if you're you're catering, for lunches and you maybe provide salads,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's so important that they are risk assessed. It's very easy to look at it and go, I've looked at it and it says I need to be getting this done once a year. But if your ventilation looks like some of the photos we've seen after 4 months, it needs to be looked at, and it applies the same for standard ventilation as well. Generally, your office and workspaces, they should be looked at annually, but obviously there's so many different types of environments where ventilation is. Your hospitals, lab areas, production facilities, again, depending on how they're used, the risk level and the usage level, it all sort of comes together to give you an idea of, how it's best for you to manage that.
So that's quite a helpful example. So you mentioned about a hospital. We got a hospital one. So I guess there's two sides to that, isn't there? There's the risk and the likelihood of it happening. So you could have a hospital that's in a really clean environment, or you could have a kind of normal office block that's in a really dirty environment. It's next to a busy main road. So although the consequences, perhaps you haven't necessarily got vulnerable people, you've still got, the input is still pretty bad. So there's kind of two sides to that equation, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, looking at the example here, this was a hospital ward itself. Now, although it was the extract ductwork, you can clearly see that from the photo on the left how much it has been taking out of the room, or the ward area itself in general. And now, there's clearly a build up there. So there's a couple of things really that sort of points back to the fresh air that's going in there. Is it sufficient? Is that clean air sufficient enough? Is it going in dirty, potentially, which is obviously speeding up the process of the contamination? And then ultimately, it's the fact that all that in there is nasties one way or another. And, they're effectively, we've all been in hospitals and whatnot. If you look up, the ventilation grill will probably be sort of above somebody in a bed, and having that build up just above their head, it's not very nice.
Well, I've got a personal story on that, actually. My second daughter ended up in NICU, and they said, "Oh, she's getting really cold," and they put her, under the air vents. Of course, she's getting cold. Yeah. So literally, the air's blowing straight down on her. So if that looks like that, I'm thinking, great. That is not what you want a vulnerable,
no
2-day-old baby, right?
No, exactly. And I say the main issue where you get things like this is when you're using the ventilation for something else. So in the industry that we're in as well, your fire safe works would be things called fire dampers. I won't move into them too much because it's a little bit off from what we do, but fire dampers are located within the ventilation ductwork. And when you drop that damper down, it's very loud, and it can be quite a shock. You drop some of those anywhere near this, and there's every good chance. And it happens. It's when we get, we get called in for this reason. They'll drop a damper, and the ventilation grill that's sort of 2-3 meters away just coughs out dust, and it's just where all this buildup has been knocked out.
Lovely. So I guess that's quite interesting. So what you were saying about the in and the out, I guess once you've had a clean, both on the in and the out, then you get kind of a baseline, which, you may not have had this clean for a while, because it's been outside. I guess once you've had that first clean, then you can start to see, is it building up? Because we don't know here, looking at this, is this like 1 week? Is this 10 years? Is it never been cleaned? And so I guess after you look at it a year, you can see, well, what's coming in, what's going out, and we kind of get a sense of, are we doing the right things here? Because if you're getting a load of build-up on the way in, then you might need some more filtration or something like that to stop it even getting into the duct, presumably.
Yeah, definitely. And if you can get them in, if you can get everything when it starts out and when your building goes up, your ductwork should look how it looks on the right. And if you are ensuring that you're inspecting it yearly or 6 monthly, you can give yourself a rough idea of when that contamination level might hit again, whether that's 2, 3, 4 years and so on.
Right. Yeah.
If that's, a lot of these systems, they are recirc, they can be recirc units as well. So effectively all that means is that the bad air the extract air is coming in, it's being cleaned, and then they'll use a bit of it, or they'll use, a bit of it with the fresh intake, and then they'll provide it back round. If that's coming in dirty and your filter is under a lot of pressure, or it's not in a suitable condition, you're effectively putting some of that bad air back into the system.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Sort of, the sort of recycle.
Yeah.
So I like that idea that it gives you a chance to really be more proactive, and you can say, look, we know from experience that in about, we're going to check in a year's time, but probably we're going to have a proper clean in 2 years' time, say something like that. Is that, or do you have to clean it? Just to be clear,
No.
You have to clean every year.
No, so there is no law that says you have to clean your ductwork.
Right.
It's guidance, and TR19 is seen as the guidance for it. Although it's not a law, though obviously there is, we have acts in place to ensure that you are providing this sort of suitable workspace for hospitals or just general workplaces. And it's sort of down to the landlord or the tenant, whoever it is, its responsibility to look after this. to ensure that it is suitable. And in TR19, you have acceptance levels. There are different acceptance levels depending on where you are, what building you're in, are you in hospitals, etc. And a part of that is then showing your compliance, recording. These photos are great. Once you get a load of those photos, it looks really good. If you're a tenant or you're a facilities company that's been looking after the building, you don't want those photos on the left and then you give back to your client and go, well, we've looked after your building, but this is what your ventilation looks like. You'd much rather hand it over on the right. And for the tenant themselves or the landlord, they are responsible for this.
And I guess the bigger especially if you're a landlord with multiple businesses and so on, this is one of those things that touches everybody. So it's kind of like a single point of failure. So if you get it wrong once, you've affected a lot of different people, as where obviously a small business, open the windows, the risk is much, much lower. But the bigger, the more complex, but single source system, you've got that single point of failure.
No, definitely. And I say, unfortunately, the it can also go back to situations of insurance or insurance claims investigations. We've worked on, we've worked in hospital areas where there's been an outbreak, and as part of the outbreak, the investigation has been, have you been maintaining your ventilation ductwork? If you say, if they investigate you and you show them the photo on the left, it doesn't look great for yourself. So it's ensuring that you've covered yourself and you're obviously covering the people, because unfortunately, when there are bad cases like that, insurance claims start sort of getting thrown around. Being able to show that you are compliant for that, it really does help your business.
That's come up a number of times as we've looked at, I mentioned at the start, we've looked at a number of other topics, that it isn't always just how, am I ticking a legal box? It's more like, well, if this gets investigated or it does lead to, say there's a outbreak of disease or a fire, it just doesn't look very good. If you go, well, when was it last cleaned? Oh, it's never been cleaned. Well, that's not going to look great. And it just makes, even if that wasn't the cause, it's going to be very hard to prove it wasn't the cause, because you haven't done anything about it. So
no, exactly right. And if we go back to the kitchen extract, for example, a lot of the buildings out there, the tenant that's using the kitchen wouldn't necessarily be responsible for the whole system. There's potentially that they're responsible for some of the system. But if some of your system creates a fire and you burn down the building and put a load of other companies out of business, and you've got no evidence to say you've ever cleaned your kitchen extract ductwork, it's fancy getting.
And I guess even that, and again, we've had this issue as well, because in multiple occupancy type situations with a landlord, I guess if I'm the kitchen owner, I'm probably thinking, well, I've got to clean that hood, and that's going to be on my checklist, but I don't feel particularly responsible for the kind of where that goes next, because that's part of the building infrastructure.
Exactly. And then I think
who is responsible for what, I guess, is really important.
So then in that sort of situation, it would be the landlord's responsibility still to ensure that the tenants of the building are, still keeping in line and maintaining their ventilation system. Because ultimately, if you don't, it would fall onto the landlord should there ever be an issue.
Absolutely. Well, we are just over the half hour, so feel free to ask any questions if you are watching. I'm looking down our quick fire questions. Do you know what? We've already covered quite a lot of these, so I'm going to try.
I feel like we might have taken a few out. Yes.
I was thinking, we've just answered that. So because we're just saying who's responsible for duct cleaning in leased buildings. Well, we've just kind of it's kind of typically the landlord, right? But you've got to have that clarity and check your lease. We've said that in the past, and like one of the actions after this call is like, go and check your lease, or if you're leasing, check that lease so that you kind of got people to sign. One thing, I guess, some quick tips, like how can I tell, like right now, other than like a thorough inspection, like what are the telltale signs that my building's ventilation system might need a clean?
So it could be a multiple of things. Heat is a good one. Sometimes you can sort of walk into a room and there's if you have a room that's a lot hotter than another room, for example, if if we're working in let's say we're in a large office block, heat could be a good sign that the ventilation is not working correctly. Smell could be an odor, sort of a dust odor, and any point any moisture gets in that dust, you get that sort of sludginess. You'll sort of get a bit of a smell from that. Just dust itself. If you know, next time you're out and about, if you look up and look at an extract grill, you will generally, and unfortunately in most places, you will see dust going around the edges there, and sometimes you can sort of see into it. Everything like that is sort of a good indicator that the ventilation itself is not in the best condition.
Yeah, so I'm guessing for that, because my sense of smell isn't amazing. I guess find that person in your office who's good with wine, right? You know.
Yeah,
and
that's the other thing. I mean, if you know,
you know.
That's it. And then sort of bigger picture, if you are the sort of facilities company, or you are the landlord, check your fans, check the filters on the fans. If they're so blocked you can't even see through them, there's probably an issue somewhere along the line.
Yeah. I'm just seeing Richard O'Brien. I don't know if you remember the Crystal Maze. Start the fans, please.
Yeah.
You mentioned the sort of mad scientist going around checking all this. Sorry. Back in the room. Come on. Let me just. We talked about grease potentially causing fire. Can dust cause? Is that a fire risk?
Yeah, it is. So within your normal ventilation, you generally will have blade dampers. They could be a volume control damper, which is there to adjust the volume going in or out, and also fire dampers, like we were speaking before. But within those, they are assets within the ductwork. And anytime you get something within the ductwork, it's the perfect surface for dust to build up on. And with large sort of quantities of dust with a build up, dust itself, a slight spark, anything like that will cause it to ignite. Now, it may not generally start a fire, but if you had a whole sort of ductwork system on your left there, one sort of spark within that, you definitely, there's a very good chance that you will have an issue with a fire. But yeah, dust definitely, it is flammable.
Right. So I guess it's similar. I know you have to be very careful in things like grain silos, because you can get this kind of potent mix of fuel source surrounded by lots of air, right? So that's
so if you've ever seen one of those fall over, sometimes the impact of it sort of falling over and hitting the thing will cause the grain to ignite, and it can be the same within ductwork. Should you be using something in there that obviously this ductwork is stainless steel or galvanized steel, and any sort of sort of surface to surface contact that could potentially ignite a spark, excuse me. And you wouldn't want to fancy being in there when you're igniting all that dust on your left there.
No, it's surprising how dust, you wouldn't think dust, but dust explosions can be quite. Is that? I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic. Is that something that does happen, or is that quite rare?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly rare, but sort of I think any good officer, when we go around to these areas and we say, look, there's a high buildup of dust in there, we need to clean it. They will say, there is a good chance that will ignite, and we'll say, yeah, you're right. The cleaning methods for that would be using nylon brush tips, and if they go around too fast and at such a high velocity, there's every chance that you will ignite that. So yeah, dust is becoming a big thing now on building sites. I don't know if you're not allowed to sweep anymore. You can't sweep your dust. It's got to be hoovered up now, because you sweep that dust around and you just, you're bringing it into the air, everything like that. If you're cutting slabs, you have to spray it with water to reduce the dust coming out. So dust is a massive issue. Dust is a massive issue, not just for the fire risk, but just in general. A lot of people now are looking at it as being quite a concern. Back in the day, you would probably clean this ductwork here and you wouldn't even wear a mask. Now there's every chance you'll have to wear filtered masks over the head, pressurized hoods, everything like that, because it's really becoming a thing now.
Yeah, and I guess at this time of year as well, I guess, do you see that with things like vermin or birds, that you've got a nice sort of warm sort of chimney, is that sort of becoming a problem with nests or
yeah, definitely. We have a real horror story, which I didn't actually send you the photo from, because but we went to have a look at a ventilation system once upon a time, and a bird had actually got in through the top and it had got down to the bottom trying to get out, and it was
Right.
effectively about a meter away from the cooking area at the time, and it had just been up there with a sort of warm air. So it's not very pleasant. And yes, it is a massive issue if you go up onto sort of rooftop plant rooms, pigeons everywhere. And as much as building owners, it doesn't always work. They always find a way in. And if they get in through your fresh air intakes, it's feathers, it's leaves, it's sticks, anything like that on your fresh air intake. That's why it's so important to ensure that your filters are proper, working properly, and are there in the first place, really, because any nasties coming in from outside, it's the one bit that you can't really control too much. But that's why you need to ensure that your filters are there.
Yeah. And by the way, if that's an issue for anyone, and if you've got ventilation, it sounds like it probably should be, as I said at the start, go and check out the very first one of these we did, which was on pest control. And those kind of issues came up a lot. So check that video out as well.
Yeah. And so just jumping onto the kitchen, the smell of that grease, it's the perfect thing to sort of entice rats. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, if you look at the ductwork, or you go up to the ductwork, and there is the rat droppings and all sorts around the ceiling tiles, because they're just drawn to the smell.
Yeah. And I guess the thing that made me think of that actually is I've just been clearing out our workshop, and there are bats sometimes in the area, and there's bat droppings and so on. I was looking up about that, and it was saying, well, if you're going to clean that up, you've got to be wearing really good, it's quite serious. So the combination of dust, and once you start adding like vermin, droppings and this sort of thing, it's really quite a potential health issue.
Yeah, so a lot of companies, even if the company is going to look at your kitchen extract ductwork, if they go above the ceiling tiles and they see rat droppings, they'll walk away, because they're not trained to deal with it. So you will have to get, you'd have to get specialists in to get them removed. And ultimately, on top of all of that, what we all look at here really is the cost of all of this. I can tell you from working in the industry, the cost to have somebody survey your ventilation ductwork to the cost of having somebody clean it is massive. So, to spend a small amount to have someone to look at it every 6 months or so, then to have somebody come at the end of 10 years and give you a bill to clean it is it's quite a difference.
It's the classic stitch in time thing, as with so many of these issues, right? It's better to have a quick look, and you can solve it much more easily than having to kind of retro.
Massively so. The amount of times we've gone to customers and said, you're looking at about this much, and they can't believe that it's going to cost them that much. And that if it was installed correctly in the first place, and it was maintained, it wouldn't be an issue. But it's out of sight, out of mind, unfortunately, until it becomes a problem.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. So two more quick questions, I think. So these are just really short answers for these. So how often should I this is a bit of a piece of string question, but how often should I change my filters in my ventilation system?
It depends what system you're looking at, depends what the filters you have in place, depends where you are, depends what the areas are serving. If it's a very sensitive area, if it's lab areas, they probably need looking at every sort of 3 to 6 months. If you're a general sort of commercial building, you could be looking at 12 months. Hospitals, again, HTM is a different guidance for hospitals as well. It all depends. That information is available. HTM is available. TR19 does provide some assistance. But ultimately, unless you're sort of working in those sensitive areas, they need to be risk assessed.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. That's great. And then finally, how can I stay up to date with all of these, compliance requirements?
So there's loads of different ways. BESA send out a lot of information on ventilation. TR19, the HSE, they've always liked to keep people updated with ventilation. Your contractor, if you have a contractor, whether you have a ventilation contractor or you use a cleaning company or a maintenance company, they're always good to go. And ultimately, Kevin, you can pass me the money in the brown bag for this one, but attending webinars like this are great because that's it. Yeah, that's it. Not a lot of people know about it.
Number one way.
Exactly right. That's it. And so not a lot of people know about it. And it's you come along to one of these and you sort of it just takes that one time. You'll look next time you're out and about, you'll look at ductwork. All I do is look at ductwork when I go out now. It's really sad. I'll say to my wife, clean that. We've been to that. We've done that one. Do you know what I mean? So you'll notice it
I've heard it
more
put
often
that
now.
it's like your reticular activating system. So in other words, you
Yeah.
notice once you sort
Yeah.
of program your brain, you'll see it everywhere. Like so, we've
That's it,
ruined you for going to the
yeah,
next
the amount of times I
restaurant.
look at it and go, you can't clean that. It's not accessible. You know, it's really bad. Really bad.
Yeah. She's like, Chris, just don't guess what's going on in the kitchen. I just want to eat my meal. You know.
No, I tell you, that is the other thing as well. I've been in some kitchens and I wouldn't recommend them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, Chris, look, that has been super helpful. We haven't had any questions actually. This is a quiet audience, but I hope you found it really helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for our next webinar next quarter. Chris, thank you for being a good sport, and we've finished bang on time, so there are no more questions. So I won't stick around and answer them. But it's your last chance. Any quick questions, do type them in. We'd love your feedback as well. If let us know if there's any more topics you'd like us to cover, or you thought we could do. Either any nice comments or things we could do better for next time. Do let us know. We do listen to your feedback. As I say, check out those videos online, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.